Easy now, I've got you. There, hold steady.
In the heart of the Old West, an injured Apache woman whispered words that stopped a lone rancher in his tracks, and what he chose to do next shocked an entire frontier. This is not just a story of survival, but of courage, humanity, and a decision that defied hatred and history itself. If you love powerful stories of forgotten love and untold truths from the Old West, make sure to subscribe, share this video with someone who appreciates real stories, and comment your thoughts below. Now, let's get started. The sun was sinking fast when the rancher first heard the sound. It wasn't the cry of an animal or the wind scraping the canyon walls. It was human, weak, and breaking apart with pain. He reined his horse hard, heart pounding, instinct screaming danger. In this land, nothing good came from stopping after dark. But the sound came again, closer now, trembling, and Sir was no more mistaking it. Someone was dying outside in the open, and if he rode away, the truth would follow him longer than any bullet ever could. He found her near the dried riverbed, half covered in dust, her dark hair tangled with blood and sand. She tried to move when she saw him, but her body betrayed her. Pain twisted her face as she fell back, gasping. She was Apache, unmistakably so, and fully grown, hardened by survival. Her eyes locked onto his, sharp despite the agony, measuring him, preparing for the worst. Then she spoke, her voice barely holding together, saying she couldn't close her legs, that something inside her was wrong, shattered by days of flight and a brutal fall. The rancher didn't answer. He simply stood there, frozen between fear and responsibility. Helping her could mean being branded a traitor. Leaving her could mean condemning a human being to slow death. He had seen enough bodies in his life to know how this would end if he turned away. She wasn't begging him. She was warning him, telling him the truth so he would understand the risk. That honesty struck him harder than any plea ever could. Carefully, he dismounted, keeping his hands visible, speaking slowly so she knew he meant no more harm. Every step toward her felt like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. When he lifted her, her body stiffened with pain, but she didn't fight him. Trust came not from comfort, but from necessity. He wrapped her in his coat, placed her on the horse, and began the long ride back to his ranch, knowing full well that his life would not be the same by morning. The ride was brutal. Every jolt drew a sharp breath from her, and each sound chewed into him deeper. He rode slower than he ever had, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure she believed. The night closed in around them, silent and heavy, as if the land itself was watching. By the time the cabin came into view, her strength was fading fast. He carried her inside, laid her on his bed, then stepped back like a man who had crossed into sacred ground without permission. He slept outside that night, wrapped in a blanket beneath the stars, rifle close but untouched. The sounds from inside the cabin haunted him, soft cries, labored breathing, the struggle of a body refusing to give up. He did not go in unless she called for water. When she did, he entered only long enough to help, his movements careful, respectful. This was not mercy driven by pity. The rancher helped her back inside, knowing then what he had been avoiding. She needed a doctor, real treatment, and that meant town, that meant exposure, that meant danger for them both. The decision tore at him. Towns were not forgiving places. An Apache woman walking beside a white rancher would draw attention instantly. Accusations would come fast, and violence faster. But watching her suffer in silence was no more longer an option. That night, he told her what he planned. He didn't ask permission. He asked if she trusted him enough to try. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. That single gesture carried more weight than words ever could. They rode at dawn, slowly, openly. He did not hide her face or claim ownership. When they reached the edge of town, conversation stopped. Eyes followed them. Hands tightened. He felt the tension rise like a storm about to break. When questioned, he spoke calmly, firmly, saying she was injured and needed a doctor. No more lies, no more apologies, just truth. That confidence unsettled people more than fear ever would. The doctor examined her and confirmed what she already knew. The injury was severe but not permanent. With time, rest, and care, she would heal. Relief washed over her face, quiet and controlled, but unmistakable. For the first time since the desert had broken her, hope returned. The rancher stood outside during the examination, listening to every sound, realizing just how deeply invested he had become in her survival. When they rode back to the ranch, the world felt different. Nothing about the land had changed, yet everything had. A line had been crossed, not just between two people, but between fear and courage. This was no more longer about saving a life. It was about standing by a choice, no more matter the cost. And as the sun set once more over the plains, both of them understood that what began as an act of mercy was becoming something far more dangerous and far more powerful. The town did not forget what it had seen. When the rancher returned with her, whispers followed light shadows. Doors that once opened easily now hesitated. Eyes measured distance, intent, and loyalty. Yet beyond the ranch, far from judgment, healing continued in quiet persistence. She walked more each day, slow but determined, refusing help unless pain forced her to accept it. The rancher watched without interfering, understanding that strength, for her, meant dignity. What neither of them said aloud was already shaping the air between them, something steady, unspoken, and dangerous in its honesty. As her body healed, her presence changed the ranch itself. Silence no more longer felt empty. Evenings stretched longer, filled with low conversation and shared meals. She spoke of her people, not as stories of loss alone, but of laughter, customs, and land remembered through the body rather than maps. He listened, realizing how little history had ever taught him beyond blame. In return, he spoke of his own past, if violence done in uniforms, if regrets buried deeper than the soil he worked. They did not seek forgiveness from each other, only understanding. Trouble came reading one afternoon in the form of 3 men from town. They claimed concern, curiosity, and law, in that order. Their questions were sharp, their eyes sharper. Why was she, sir? Why wasn't she returned to her people? Why was he protecting her? The rancher answered calmly, stating she was injured and free to leave when she chose. His voice never rose, but his stance made clear that pushing further would carry consequences. The men left, but the message remained. Their peace was temporary. She knew what danger followed her presence. One night, she told him she would leave before things turned violent. The rancher said nothing at first. Then he told her she had already paid enough for running alone. If she stayed, she would not stay hidden. If harm came, it would not be because of her existence, but because of others' choices. That honesty unsettled her more than fear ever had. For the first time, she was not being asked to disappear for someone else's comfort. Weeks passed. Her strength returned fully, but something else held her, sir. Not obligation, not safety, choice. She worked alongside him, learning the rhythms of French life, offering skills of her own. The land responded differently to her touch, as if recognizing a familiar spirit. Neighbors noticed. Suspicion slowly gave way to reluctant respect. Not acceptance, but acknowledgement. The Old West rarely changed its mind quickly, but it did recognize resilience when it stood firm long enough. Then came the soldiers. They arrived without warning, uniforms cutting through the dust like knives. They demanded to know why an Apache woman was living openly on private land. The rancher stood between them and her without hesitation. He stated she was under his protection, that she was not a prisoner, and that no more crime had been committed. Tension tightened until even the wine seemed to stop. One wrong word would have ended everything, but something unexpected happened. She stepped forward herself. She spoke calmly, directly, without fear. She said she was no more one's property, that she had been injured, treated, and now chose where she stood. Her voice did not shake. The soldiers were not used to that kind of certainty. After a long moment, they left, not defeated, but unwilling to ignite something they could not control. When the dust settled, both of them understood how close the world had come to tearing them apart. That night, the weight of what they had faced finally surfaced. There were no more grand declarations, no more dramatic gestures, just truth. She told him that in saving her, he had given her more than survival. He had given her the right to decide her own future. He told her that in standing beside her, he had found a version of himself he thought was long gone. What grew between them was not romance born of rescue, but respect forged under pressure. The seasons shifted, the land cooled, and with change came clarity. She did not belong to the ranch, nor did he belong to the pest that tried to claim him. What they shared existed outside ownership and expectation. When she spoke of returning to her people, he did not argue. When he spoke of staying rooted to the land, she did not ask him to follow. Love, in its truest form, demanded no more sacrifice of self. On the morning she chose to leave, there were no more tears, only steady breathing and eyes that held gratitude without debt. He gave her supplies, a horse, and something more valuable than protection. Trust. She touched his shoulder once, a gesture simple and complete. Then she rode toward her future, not as someone rescued, but as someone restored. The rancher watched until she disappeared into the horizon. The land felt quiet again, but not empty. Something permanent had been carved into him, not loss, but proof. Proof that compassion could survive what hatred was taught. Proof that doing the right thing did not always lead to ruin. Sometimes, it led to redemption. Years later, travelers would speak of a ranch where an Apache woman once healed, where a man stood against fear without raising a weapon. The story changed with each telling, but the truth remained untouched. In a brutal world, two people chose humanity over history, and the choice echoed far longer than gunfire ever could.